I kind of came up with 3 plays all at the same time. And those plays were thematically linked. They were linked. There's a few common threads to each of those plays. One of them is that they are all set in the American mid-1960s. They're all based on real events. And they're also based on real events that have a contemporary resonance with the time that I discovered those stories in. And I think one thing that I was realizing was that I wasn't writing plays based on history because I wanted them to be history lessons. I was writing plays based on history because I wanted them to be reminders. What I discovered in each of these stories set a generation ago was that they exposed different kinds of failings of what it is to be human. And it was me recognizing that we as a species continue to make the same critical mistakes generation after generation. And I think it sometimes requires seeing that time and time again to hopefully at some point admit that we fail and hopefully do better. The other thing that I found in all of these plays was each of them was a story. Each of them, to some extent, is a David versus Goliath story. One thing I'm often drawn to is stories where an individual idealist fights a large institution. And in this case, that institution was typically government or some kind of political force. And as this individual idealist fights that institution, they typically also find that their own personal selfish ambition or greed gets in the way of their idealism. Why did I have to write that? Maybe because I was going through a similar kind of journey myself, or I fancied myself an idealist, but I realized that I'm human just like everybody else, and I have failings, and sometimes those failings get in the way of my own idealism. Hi, my name is Sean Devine. I'm the playwright of Daisy. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the play and the production happening at International City Theatre, watch this video. Daisy is about, it takes place during the 1964 presidential election where Lyndon Johnson, who had just prior to that been made president when Kennedy was killed. Lyndon Johnson is now fighting to become president of his own right. And Lyndon Johnson knows that he wants to advance a pretty ambitious agenda, something that we all eventually learn to become the Great Society. And Johnson knows that he is likely going to be up against Barry Goldwater, who was a pretty radical candidate from the right wing. And what Johnson wanted to do was Johnson wanted to win by a landslide so that he could be president in his own right and come out of the shadow of Kennedy. And so Johnson hired this ad agency out of New York called Doyle Dane Bernbach. And this was at a time when ad agencies were kind of, I guess, getting a little bit boring. And this ad agency, Doyle Dane Bernbach, they were leading something brand new and bold called the Creative Revolution. And he hires this ad agency and gives them a mission to do whatever they can to crush Barry Goldwater. This ad agency starts putting together some ideas and some ads, and they go out and they hire this eccentric sound genius called Tony Schwartz, and all of them create this ad called the Daisy ad. And when they see this ad, they realize that it's probably far too shocking to put on television. If you haven't seen it already, the Daisy ad was basically an anti-nuclear war ad. And the ad was designed to scare the pants out of people. And by putting this ad out on TV, they shocked the nation, and Johnson got his massive landslide. All the while this advertising team is making the ad, they're wrestling with the ethics of it. They're wrestling with whether or not it's ethical to put out such a dangerous negative message on TV. They do it anyways. Johnson wins, and then Johnson goes on and escalates the war in Vietnam. And what you see there was a group of idealists who thought that they were putting out a message to advance peace, and they found out that the message they put out put in power a man who escalated war. I think one thing, so here we are, we're, I'm Canadian, but I certainly watch what's going on in the States, and we're about to watch the second election in a row in which we're learning that there are forces at play in the way that elections are waged, where voters are manipulated in ever more dangerous ways. For the last 4 years, we heard about how fake news grew to become a phenomenon where it's hard for people to even know what is true anymore. And that power to manipulate people is used during elections when ideally, and there again, I use the word idealism there, but ideally, an election should be seen as a pretty important, if not sacred time, when every citizen is handed clear, unvarnished, factual information in which they can make a decision that represents what they honestly, truly want, so that we can have a verdict that represents the will of the people. And that process gets aborted and tarnished and twisted around to the point where voters hardly can even know what they're really choosing when they do vote. They're just being pushed and pressured and manipulated into making choices. That certainly is one of the things that Daisy talks about, because that campaign, the 1964 campaign, was the time that manipulation of voters' intentions came to bear in a way that it never did. And at the heart of the play, the play ends with a question about whether or not people are truly good inside, and if they are, will a good result come out of that? So I think that's what people walk away from the play looking at, that they have to really be responsible for being as informed as they can when they do vote, and to never forget that powerful forces are doing whatever they can to manipulate them into making choices. This has been an interesting year for me for Daisy. Daisy was supposed to have 4 different productions this year, and COVID certainly got in the way of all of them. Here in Ottawa, I was co-producing a production of Daisy that opened and closed on the same night. It opened on March 12th and closed on March 12th. And that was something that I put a lot of years of care into, and so that was bittersweet. For the Los Angeles production, well, sorry, I'll talk about the Los Angeles production in a second. There's a production in Cincinnati that I was really excited about. That also got canceled. And what that company did is they rehearsed it, but they filmed it. So they turned what was going to be a stage production into a filmed production. And I haven't seen that, but that's going to be very interesting to see. For ICT, for International City Theater, it's definitely bittersweet for me because I've never been to Los Angeles, and I was planning on going down there to see it. So obviously I couldn't do that. But I know who is in it, and it's a bunch of fantastic actors. So I'm excited to see what they're going to be doing. And I've never seen a virtual production of my play. And I know that they're going to be fusing in a lot of the audio archive material that goes with the play. So what I'm most intrigued by, because I haven't seen what they're going to do, but I've been told what they're going to do. What I'm most intrigued by is, from the way I've told they're going to do it, I'm going to see six different screens for the six different characters. And I imagine it's going to feel a lot more intimate than if it were on a big stage where the actors are spread out 20 feet apart or whatever. I've got my fingers crossed. I think any player is nervous on opening night, whether that opening night is in person or online. I'm excited to see it, but I've got my fingers crossed. I'll be very grateful if they watch this version of Daisy, but even more important for me to tell your viewers that they must see this production of Daisy. I'm more inclined to tell your viewers that they must see theater in general. I've been a lover of theater for all of my life. Being inside a theater building, being among theater people, is usually a time when I feel that I'm closest to the best of what humanity is and can be. And I was watching something the other day, and theater brings out, I think, that theater brings out our humanity. Theater brings out our sense of community with each other. I was talking to the artistic director of ICT, and I was talking about how there's a phenomenon that when you go see a play in a building with other people, and you're in a room with a couple hundred other people watching a play, at some point, all of your breathing starts to happen at the same time. You start to breathe at a certain pace with each other. And that's an experience that can't be had in another way. Whether or not that can translate to a virtual theater, I don't know. But at some extent, it is still a bunch of people sitting around a bright light, watching a story being told. And I still do think, whether it's virtual or in person, that still does bring out the best of humanity. And I think now, as we're going through some pretty dark and stressful times, it's a really good time for us to be in touch with the best of our humanity. Hi, so I'm the playwright of Daisy, taking place at International City Theater right now. If you enjoyed this conversation, and if you enjoy conversations that happen here at Stage Explorations, please feel free to support International Theater by buying a ticket to go see my play, happening October 24th to November 7th.